Well, hello. So it's Friday night, so that means it's live stream night, and it's the end of the week, and looking forward to the weekend. And it's good to see that we already got a few people out there. Paula, Jackie, Bobbert, welcome. Good to have you out there. Thank you for joining us. And then of course Angela, beaming in over there from Boise. How you doing, Angela?
I'm doing okay. How are you doing this week?
I'm doing pretty good. I think we have a pretty heavy topic tonight, maybe.
Well, we have an
A lot to talk about.
interesting section. Yeah,
Yeah.
you picked one with a lot to it. So
Mhm.
I was telling him before the show started that I'm having a hard time trying to condense some of the stuff in it to be able to talk about, because she brings up integral theory,
Uh-huh.
and it's very there's a lot to it. So anyway,
Well,
we'll just
hi, Paula. Hi, Anchor. Well, I'm gonna try to get you to explain some of it to me anyway, if we can. But the book we're talking about is "Quit Like a Woman," and it's written by Holly Whitaker. And I've had it on my Kindle for a while. I got it for hi, Joe. I got it for a book club, and we haven't yet read it, but um, I read the first 7 chapters, and I thought it was amazing. I really enjoyed it a great deal. Um, for me, I liked that she was talking about the social aspect of recovery and um, how how women, because of our history and the way that our recovery community was built, being so male centric,
mhm.
is problematic, to say the least. And it was just great. And then as you go into the book further, she gets into a little bit more description of the way that she sees recovery. And I just thought it was great. But anyway, I thought I would read just a little bit from the 7th chapter. It's called "Finding a New Way," and we can use that maybe to start a discussion. And for those of you who are watching and listening who have read this book, please feel free to call us or a comment, especially if I get something wrong, because I just read it today, and I'm not always so great at comprehending what I read. But anyway, so I'm going to go and hi, Frank. Hi, Joe. And Bree. Bree is there. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and share the screen, and I'll read this little paragraph, and then we'll just take it from there. Okay, so here we go. Boom, 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 boom. There we go. Okay. And I was telling Angela, I really should have read the chapter before this. I think it was titled AA was made for men, something like that. Anyway, but here we go. Finding a new way. The message of traditional recovery is that you need to shut up and listen. It says you need to go to 90 meetings in 90 days, adopt this label, know your place, read this book, work this program, do this thing. It says you don't know and you can't be trusted. The program is smarter than you are. All you have to do is work it and it will work. Early on in my recovery, I didn't have the words to paint my opposition to the system, but I did have a scream inside me. The scream said, if I do this thing, if I go this way, if I deny more of myself and my needs, if I fit myself into one more box that tells me I don't know best, if I have to sit down and shut up and listen one more time, I will disintegrate, implode. The scream didn't want me to bushwhack my way through a masculine centric structure. The scream didn't want to hear how I was seeing it wrong or that my ego was out of control. The scream wanted to be heard and yielded to. It wanted nothing more than to be taken seriously and to see what it actually needed for once, instead of what the system told me it needed. So, I'll go ahead and read this last part. And so I listened to it and set out on my path without the words, without the ideas or understanding I can so easily articulate today. I set out knowing only that everything I'd been told I needed to do to be successful was wrong. To finally heal, I didn't need to deny myself further. I needed to lift up the parts of me that had been forever repressed and denied. I also didn't need a map created by a man. I needed my own damn map. Wow. Anyway, so I think we all need our own damn map, to be honest with you. But
Yeah,
anyway,
it sounds a lot like what you've been learning about and exploring in your recovery coaching and
yeah,
peer stuff.
yeah, it really is. You know, it's I've had a couple of experiences this last week, I guess, that have made me start questioning how I talk about my recovery, I guess, especially when it comes to AA. And I'll tell you, the first experience I had was at an AA meeting I went to online. It was an Australian meeting, a PJ's meeting in Sydney, and it's called an ID meeting.
Mm-hmm.
And I went for like 2 weeks in a row. And at this ID meeting, you basically share your story is what you do. And like, I said, I can't possibly share my story every week. So I tried to find little snippets of my story and try to draw something from it. So what I did, I shared my story about how I struggled with my drinking, how I realized I had a problem, how I found hope and got help, blah, blah, blah. So I went through that little story and I said, and that's the 3 steps, right? And I thought, okay, I did a great job. Well, after the meeting, this woman who I met like the week before, and I really like her. She's new, and she is someone who has been traumatized by religion. Okay,
Mm-hmm.
and asked the question at the end of the meeting. She says, "Do you really have to bother with those steps?" And I immediately regretted that I had to throw the steps in there because I thought to myself, why did I do that? I could have just told the story without having to attach a step to it, and realizing that the language of those steps are such that it causes confusion where she has to grapple with all that kind of crap.
Mm-hmm.
And anyway, this guy went before me and he was talking about, oh yeah, the steps are wonderful and great, blah, 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 blah. And then PJ asked me how I thought about it. And then I kind of went on about, that I'm much more lax about it and that, you just have to put it in your own language. But anyway, making a long story short, from that experience, I just kind of have been thinking very carefully to myself that, you know what, I need to stop putting everything in context with the damn 12 steps. Not that I don't appreciate that I got something out of those steps, but there's no reason that I have to put a number to every damn experience that I've
Yeah.
had. And it could actually, by doing that, it kind of gives people the impression that it's those steps which were more important than the actual experience or the things that I was doing.
Mm-hmm.
And it's really, I think, particularly hard for someone who's new and may have a hard time with the readings that you're exposed to at the beginning of a meeting. So anyway, that was one of the experiences I had. The other
Yeah.
experience I won't go into involved John Huey.
Okay, that's another podcast. So,
Yeah,
but yeah, I can see that. My thoughts are that I think it would depend on who I'm talking to, what kind of audience I'm talking to. Because, there's a part of me still that would like people within the traditional AA program to convert to secular or, adopt more secular language and stuff. I think in some cases I would probably still explain things in a way that they would understand by
yeah,
connecting the steps, because if I don't, oftentimes it seems that they think that we're completely separate and
right,
and not worth hearing about. And
yeah,
and until things change enough that AA isn't still the dominant recovery
mm,
force out there. I think that work still has some validity to it. But
yeah,
I definitely agree. If I were asked to talk anywhere else, I probably wouldn't include that, and I would probably frame it somewhat in a similar way to what Holly's talking about. So in that first section that you read, I could definitely relate because it is hard as a woman coming into AA and hearing all of the verbiage,
mm,
the male language, and then also when you bring that up, being told that, that it's fine and that people just change it in their head, or, all of that. And so it wasn't pleasant.
Yeah.
And there's, still a lot of, jokes about, women in recovery on, and how Bob, really didn't want us around,
That's right.
because we were fallen women and we were just going to tempt everybody, and that Bill had a problem with fallen women and,
Mhm.
tempted everybody. So it's not the easiest place for a woman to get sober.
Nope.
I had a friend that I've known for a long time, but she went on to get her MSW, her Master's of Social Work, and her thesis was on women, AA being damaging to women, and she wouldn't let me read it. This was quite a while ago, but she wouldn't let me read it, even though I agree with her. I'm pretty sure on
Yeah.
on what she would be saying in that. But yeah, it's for some of us, there wasn't any other game in town, and so looking at it now, there's a lot of stuff that I do differently, and when I'm working with somebody new, I do differently than how I came into it, and I love that there's books like this, and what is it, Glennon Doyle's book, Untamed.
Mhm.
And a couple of other ones that are showing the feminine perspective, I
Mhm.
guess, and what that's like, and how it can sound to us, and how that can be detrimental and difficult to deal with, particularly if you're in an area where they're very strong on, you have to go buy the book, and
Right.
the book is everything, and the steps are everything, and
Mhm.
I feel fortunate that my first sponsor is Buddhist, and so she had a different approach to it. A lot of this stuff is similar, but I never had the hardcore, you have to do this.
Mhm.
Although, from the meeting, some of the stuff did get transferred into my brain, and there are times when I've been fearful that if I don't go to meetings, that I'll get drunk and die.
Right.
But those are things that I've worked with. So yeah. Do you want to read the next section on it?
Sure. Just the next paragraph through.
Yeah.
Okay. So from the story I've laid out so far, it might sound as if I found Alan Carr's The Easy Way to Control Alcohol and questioned my drinking, and that was that. But it didn't go like that at all. What did happen was I stopped running. I had absolutely no plan, no quick fix, no scheduled way to perfection. I had only the hope and openness that come with facing the music, instead of turning it up louder or running faster into oblivion. Finding Carr was part of it, my way in. But then I found a therapist. And soon after that, Eckhart Tolle. Is that Tolle?
I've heard it said
Yeah.
a couple of different ways, but
And it
yeah.
snowballed from there. The more I went forward, the more I wanted to live. The more I wanted to live, the more things presented themselves to me. I just had to keep going. I just had to keep my eyes open. Should I go on?
Yeah, I think she describes it in here
In
in
more.
a little more
Okay.
detail. Yeah.
Okay. The pieces that laid the foundation of my recovery showed up in the oddest of places. I found Gabby Bernstein, a spiritual teacher whose work helped save my life, in Bloomberg Business Week. And at one of her talks, I found Kundalini Yoga, a blend of spiritual and physical practices that incorporates movement, breathing techniques, meditation, and chanting, a practice that transformed me. In a business meeting, a coworker convinced me his therapist was wonderful. So I made an appointment, and that therapist saw me through to sobriety. In Kundalini training, I was
Mhm.
paired with a woman who would become my third therapist, the one I credit with saving me. Though, let's be clear, I saved myself, as we all do. One of my friends, a doctor, introduced me to functional medicine, which helped me finally overcome bulimia. Another friend gave me a book about shadow work, another profound practice in my healing, and on it went like that. The pieces fell into place, and I fell into place. My healing became the point. Freedom became the point. And I was hooked not on any specific result, but on the idea of liberation and the taste of finally having it as I moved forward, building the pieces of my recovery as I went.
Yeah. So what I like about, this section is that she talks about, various other things that she did that aren't always a part of a person's recovery. Oftentimes it seems like they get into AA and then that's their main thing. But she talks about that she tried different things. And I wasn't familiar with Alan Carr's The Easy Way to Control
Mhm.
Alcohol, so I had to look that up. And it's a guy who started out with the easy way to stop smoking, I think, and so
That's right.
he became like his program was very successful in helping people stop smoking. He still died of lung cancer, but yeah, that's just the way that goes. My understanding of it is that there's some aspects of hypnotherapy involved in his Easy Way books. But then she talks about going to a therapist, which is something that we generally talk about as being helpful regardless. And then Eckhart Tolle, and I think most people listening to this are familiar with him, but he wrote several books, including The Power of Now, and that he's buddies with Oprah, and he does have some good stuff. Like I heard him once talking about patience and frustration and standing in line at the airport, I think, and feeling frustrated that it wasn't moving faster. And then, how he analyzed, what that was happening with him, that for some reason he thought that the line should be going faster. And why did he think that? And, and that going through that helped him, calm down. So I think it's about acceptance and accepting reality as it is. So I could see some good stuff in that. The Gabby Bernstein part, I was, it's not something that I would, go to. So she's like a young spiritual leader, I guess, and kind of a guru. And I say young, she's like 41, I think. And a lot of her work seems to include, things like manifesting and that she teaches from the Course in Miracles. And so I thought that was an interesting choice, and not a direction that I would go in. But I can see, as she's describing some of the stuff that is helpful to her in her current way of thinking, where all of those things would play into each other. Because I believe a lot of Gabby's work has to do with, that you are whole. It's pretty feminine driven, that you come whole, and so you don't need to be fixed and things like that. There's nothing wrong with you, and all you need is within you, which is all good stuff. I wasn't familiar with the Kundalini yoga, so I looked that up, and she describes it as physical and spiritual practices that incorporates movement, breathing techniques, meditation, and chanting. I guess there's some stuff that the theory involves energy that lies dormant at the base of the spine until it's activated and channeled upward through the chakras in a process of spiritual perfection. So it has to do with that kind of stuff. And like many of the guru type things that are brought to the West from the East, the founder of that was implicated in a bunch of sex scandals and sexual harassment and assaults and stuff. So, which is interesting because my understanding of that, which probably isn't that great, but it's a very feminine driven kind of yoga, and a lot of it is trying to access feminine energy and stuff. And so I should do a study on why gurus seem to be sociopaths, but I don't
Yeah.
know, narcissistic sociopaths. But yeah, so that's what I learned on that. Functional medicine she mentions, which I think is a good thing, because it's usually the combination of some more holistic and Western medicine. So provided you find somebody who's actually trained in both. I know some chiropractors do it, and there's one in town here that seems to do some things that I would question as to their effectiveness. But I think that there's some good stuff in there, because it creates an awareness of your body, mind, and digestion and stuff. And those are things that in traditional recovery or in traditional AA, we don't really talk about that much.
Yeah.
And I'm finding it this time in my life, those are things that I want to explore more and understand better.
Yeah.
And then the book on shadow work. And so somebody else asks, and and Jackie, describes it well. It's a Jungian thing. It's used in a lot of I think Eastern philosophy. There's secular Buddhists that talk about it a lot, and it's very key in a lot of the integral theory community. And so we'll talk about that a little bit later.
Okay.
But my guess is that she received a book on shadow work that was likely based in integral theory.
Okay. You mentioned Alan Carr, and I recognize that name, and I think it was from William Porter's book, Alcohol Explained, and I believe that he was influenced by him. And what's interesting is that William Porter in that book writes that alcohol is bad for everybody, that it's not like you have one class of person who
right.
that it's just bad for everybody, and anybody could become addicted to it. And in fact, that because of the nature of alcohol, every time you drink alcohol, no matter how much, you always go through a period of withdrawal afterwards, because the drugs effects begin to wear off. So you go through that withdrawal,
Right.
and it's just a matter of degree, I guess, and it keeps building. Anyway, so he believes that alcohol is just bad for everybody, and that's her approach too. She's in the early part of her book, she writes about how she thinks it's dangerous to use that classification of alcoholic, because she says that it's alcohol is basically a poison, and it's not good for anybody. And and the label itself kind of stigmatizes people so that they don't want to get help. It had that effect on her. And I thought that was kind of an interesting discussion. But I think that I found it interesting because that Alan Carr, I think that that's where William Porter got that idea, but I'm sure that they weren't all connected. But also her friend Catherine Gray also writes about that part, that not drinking alcohol is just a good, healthy choice for anybody to make, because it's just not good for you.
Right.
and anybody can become addicted to it.
Right.
But I also thought that little paragraph that we read there, what I like too is that her recovery just kind of unfolded as she started seeking, and she was able to find her own path. Now, ironically enough, now it looks like she's laying out that path for other people.
Right. Yeah.
But
she's describing the path that she took, and she does, I believe, have a website, and does groups, and has a program of recovery. And from what it sounds like, I think that it sounds like an excellent choice for some people, and I'm sure that it'd be much more helpful than AA for quite a few women. But I haven't checked it out
I haven't either.
fully, and I only know from this chapter what might be included. But even with that, and even with some of the what I would describe as wooey stuff that seemed to influence her, it's probably more helpful to a lot of women than AA is, at least to get sober. I think that AA still has stuff to offer for those who are sober and need a community.
Right.
But yeah, I like the way that she describes, more of the self-directed
Mhm.
recovery, and that's what I liked in what you've shared about what you're learning and stuff. That it seems to be that states and different programs are moving to a self-directed recovery, which sounds kind of strange because a lot of us don't have very good sense of self when we come in, but
Right.
there's still like the core, that would I think it would have been a lot easier if I had some of this information, back then. And so I'm glad it's out there now and that we seem to be moving in that direction.
Before we go to the integral theory part, I wanted to talk a little bit about what I read in the preceding chapters, and I know that we've not talked about those, but this was the part that I found the most interesting was the social aspect of how AA came to be. And anyway, now I'm losing my train of thought now. But anyway, she talked about how, like you said, that women actually weren't even welcome in AA meetings in the very beginning. Marty Mann was the first woman in an AA meeting. I think that was after the Big Book was written, after 1939 maybe. And then they didn't have the first black meetings for African Americans until like 1945.
Mm-hmm.
So it was strictly a white Protestant male
Mm-hmm.
thing. And the program was all written from that perspective. And another interesting thing she said, she was quoting some other spiritual person, and she said that the way that they wrote this as men, they go through the spiritual process where they give up power, right? Well, that's because they had the power to give up. And she pointed out that from a woman's perspective, they didn't have the power to give up anyway, right?
Mm-hmm.
So there wasn't that need for the ego deflation
Right.
from their perspective. And I don't know, I could really relate with her in that too, because when I came in, I also didn't feel like my ego was my problem. I
Mm-hmm.
honestly didn't. That was like if someone it just I was so I felt so bad about, I just could not believe that my ego, and still I think in a way that was kind of damaging to me, that I had to always worry about my ego. And I couldn't ever, anytime that had any sort of an accomplishment or something, and if I ever mentioned it, whoever would be my sponsor at the time would remind me about humility, like it was beating me with the humility thing. And that has actually had an impact on me, because to this day I am reluctant to talk about anything that I might have done good or positive or successful. It's just kind of silly, but that kind of stuff, I'm not really thinking too well. But there was so much in her book that appealed to me, and I found interesting, that I don't know, I'm gonna have to go back and read through it again. Boy, there's a lot of comments out there.
Yeah. There. I didn't read the entire book either, and so I'll go back and do that. But from that part you were discussing, I think she does a great job of explaining, a woman's point of view, and how the ego deflation is damaging. And I believe she does, say to everyone, but particularly, to women, because of our social status, and so I think that that's great, and that she's bringing that to light to help people understand a little bit of where they're coming from on that. Some of the things. I'm reading a comment here, so I'm a little bit
Go ahead.
distracted, but yeah. The most empowering and healing step I took was when I spoke up against a traditional path my sponsor was beating me to death with, and chose to listen to my spirit almost 2 years after relapsing several times in the past with my head full of traditional AA. Very grateful for each day sober. Yeah, I think that we're talking about it more, and it could be, because we're on the pandemic happened and we were able to get on Zoom and we were able to connect with other people that speak the same language we do and have similar experiences. And it's, creating another dialect on how we can talk about recovery from a less patriarchal
Mm-hmm.
way. But I think it's still going to take some time for some of the people to realize, because I think when you've been a part of it for so long, you can't always see anymore the little ways in which it comes out in the steps or in discussion. The basic stuff of, I celebrated, whatever years today, but it wasn't me. I didn't do it. God did it. The program did it,
Right.
blah, 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 and completely taking yourself out of it. And for most of us, particularly for those of us who have child sexual abuse or, physical abuse, spousal abuse, partner abuse, that kind of stuff. We definitely need to learn to stay in body, or at least that's been my experience. That that a lot of my work is learning to be with myself and create a more healing and stronger concept of self. And so I tend to not use that language as much anymore. And that's helpful to me. Some of her language in here, I don't know if she specifies it or not, but she does use some internal family systems, self-directed leadership in parts language in there. And so that's something that, is outside the program that was helpful, it sounds like, to her, and that I usually suggest to people to check out, because I think it helps to look at self in a more healing way, and to build that part of you, so that you don't feel like you have to deflate yourself all the time, and that self it creates that that ego is part of us, and that it's not necessarily bad, that we can gain different perspectives once we have a mental framework of what could be going on with that. So anyway, those are some of the things that I think were helpful in what she described and is thinking about regarding patriarchy and AA.
Yeah. Bonnie is quoting some passages from the book. She must be
Mm-hmm.
a fan as well. She
Mm-hmm.
writes, for millennia, women have been told how to think, act, speak, be. They have been told not to trust their bodies, their intuition, their knowledge, their guiding force, their gut. No woman is more bereft of her sense of trust in herself than a woman confronting herself for the first time. How well has suppressing our own knowledge in favor of what other people think worked out for any of us? That's from, and then from
Mm-hmm.
page 263, women don't need to be groomed to apologize further. They need to be groomed to be worthy.
Yeah. I think, I don't like the word groomed,
Mhm.
but I get what she's saying, that, that helping us develop and recognize that strong sense of self within us, I think is important. And I believe she does, say for men as well, for the record, even though she's talking about women at that time, but that we all need to develop that and to see that. And, and I agree that, that particularly these days, it's not necessarily a gendered thing. There is still, artifacts. There's still a lot in our society that is very patriarchal. But my experience has been with the men in the rooms that a lot of them have very similar stuff to me, as far as childhood issues and ego deflation and low self-esteem and all of that it's, seems to be fairly equal opportunity
Yeah.
these days.
Being a man today is a lot different than the 1930 or 1920 or whatever.
Right.
So,
Yeah. And so it goes back to her point that this was a program, developed by those people for those people, and
yeah.
that, we need to be continuing to develop more inclusive programs that can speak more to a broader experience for people of color, for other disenfranchised groups. So
I just
yeah.
remembered something else from the book that I wanted to that I liked from the, and this again is from the early
Mm-hmm.
part that we weren't even talking about.
Mm-hmm.
But she talked about, okay, when she was talking about alcohol being an addictive drug, she talked about how advertising, okay, it's like she compared it to big tobacco. So in other words, when they started making cigarettes, they really didn't have a market for it. There was nobody smoking cigarettes, so they had to get people hooked on these things. So what they did is they went to movies in the 1920s and they convinced people who were making movies to have their actors smoke. And they said, yeah, you can do these scenes, you can smoke a certain way and you'll look happy, you can smoke in a certain way and look like you're thinking about something or whatever. So they were trying to sell it that your actors can use this as part of their acting, right? And that was a great way to sell cigarettes. Next thing you know, more and more people are smoking. Then they weren't getting women to smoke because society was frowning on women smoking. So
Yeah.
what they did is they wanted to get women outside smoking, so they could see them, because they figured if more women were outside smoking instead of just in their house smoking, that they could sell more cigarettes. So what they did is there was a growing women's movement at that time, and so they had these women that were marching for women's rights smoking. They were all smoking cigarettes, right? And, and that was just a way of doing it. So anyway, alcohol did the same thing.
Mm-hmm.
But the thing is, with alcohol, there was already a market out there for it, but they did the same thing. They had to hook people. And
Mm-hmm.
so one thing that helped them sell their product was this whole idea that only certain people are harmed by it. So it's not like alcohol is a dangerous drug. It's that certain people can't handle it because
Right.
they have a dangerous bad disease,
Mm-hmm.
and they have all these other issues. And so AA, unintentionally helped with that. It keeps them selling booze. And maybe someday what will happen is society will look at alcohol the same way that it's maybe looking at cigarettes. I doubt it, but it could. But it could happen, because that's the fact. Alcohol kills more people than cigarettes ever did. It kills more people, I think, than any drug out there. So it's a very dangerous thing, and it's not good for people to consume. And yet they sell lots of it, and they advertise it, and they also used it to get more women drinking different kinds of alcohol too, by
Mm-hmm.
equating it with um, women's desire for equality. And so they'd put these advertisements out of these women drinking whiskey and stuff, like, oh, they can do what the men are doing or whatever. It's just stupid crap like that. But I found that kind of stuff really interesting. I'm taking you way off the subject. I'm sorry, but that was the kind of, I found all that historical social stuff was really interesting to me. And
Right. No, I agree. And I don't know if she talks about it, but one of the things that I've noticed, particularly in probably the last 5 years, is it as far as women and drinking is friggin' book clubs. It's
yes,
just like book clubs, and so there's like all of these posters and like home plaques and things that you can get that, associate, women and wine,
that's
and that
right.
it's
Yes.
a totally okay thing to, for women to be able to, drink wine and drink a lot of wine.
Hmm.
And so, yeah, so there, I tried a couple of different book clubs, and that was my experience, was that it was
Yep.
mainly just a social venue for women to drink wine.
That's what my
Um,
wife's book club is like. She doesn't
yeah,
she doesn't drink, but she has to get drinks for everyone else.
right. Yeah. And so yeah, so I think we have some work to do in that
Yeah.
area.
She
But I
wrote
was
about
I
that
was
too, all
surprised.
that,
Yeah. Yeah, I was
oh,
surprised by my own experience with it, because
mhm.
I didn't know that it was so prevalent in that area. But yeah, it seems to be that that's one of the venues where it's highly encouraged and highly normalized to to drink a bottle of wine at a book club by yourself. Bring your own
Paula
bottle.
says that alcohol and reading do not mix.
Yeah, no, I didn't
Good
find
point.
that they do either. So yeah, I mean, I can't even read unless I've had like at least 6 hours of sleep. So I
Yeah.
can't imagine trying to do it with alcohol. But yeah, and the way that I drank, there was no reading. Um, of anything. so yeah, because I liked to drink until I couldn't see. So yeah. So let's go on to this
Okay.
next section.
Okay. All right. So this isn't how the story is supposed to go when you have a drinking problem. Is this that section? Yeah.
Mhm.
I'd seen enough portrayals of addiction on TV and knew about enough people's relatives to understand that life without alcohol is a life of deprivation, of white knuckling, a paler set of colors. The fact that my experience was the opposite of that felt like cheating, like I was doing something wrong, and it would all come tumbling down because it wasn't sad enough, or forced on me, or because I didn't feel deprived, or because I didn't resemble how you're supposed to do it. On the contrary, it was thrilling, self directed, rich, and of my own design. Did you want me to go on?
Sure.
To many, my story and my experience seemed like an anomaly. Some people even suggested that I found success because I wasn't really sick, and I could see people in AA doing this.
Oh yeah.
You were really an alcoholic anyway.
Yeah.
Wasn't really sick in the first place. That I hadn't really been addicted to alcohol because my recovery was too fast, or because I didn't still want to drink. Either way, people wanted to know how I did it, and I typically said something like Alan Carr or meditation or Gabby Bernstein, but I knew there was something more, a method, a reason it worked the way it did. It never really felt like simple luck. And this is where she goes on and she talks about her school that she started, the Tempest Sobriety
Right.
School. Did you want me to read that too?
Sure.
Okay.
We'll just read it and use the rest of the time to talk about it.
Okay. This is where she talks about that stuff, isn't it? Okay.
It's
I left
yeah.
I left my job to start Tempest Sobriety School, a recovery program tailored to the unique needs of women and other historically underrepresented folks in recovery. I had no idea where to start, but I was hell bent on figuring out what exactly it was that had freed me so I could help other people repurpose it for themselves. Only I couldn't codify my recovery. It just looked a lot like reading books, going to therapy, meditating, and maybe buying a trampoline. That all changed in early 2014 when I was turned on to John Dupuy's book, Integral Recovery. John, a therapist who'd spent decades working in the field of recovery, had once had the same problem I'd had. He knew there had to be another way beyond AA. He knew what existed wasn't enough and that there had to be some kind of template for recovery that put the person instead of an institution at the center, a template that allowed for personal evolution. What John found was Ken Wilber's integral theory and eventually Wilber AQAL, all quadrants, all levels map, or integral map. And I'll go ahead and just do this more. In the simplest terms, the integral map is a comprehensive map of human potential. It breaks down the whole human into 4 quadrants: it, its, I, we, and says that in order for humans both to grow up and wake up, to evolve, they need to nurture 4 areas of themselves: the I, or the internal process, psychology, belief, spirituality, existential meaning, knowledge, meditative states, etc. The we, or shared meaning, belonging, community, relationships. The it, or physical body, nutrition and lifestyle like exercise or taking vitamins or balancing gut health. And the its, or environmental structures, home, environment, housing, career, health, insurance. The map says that in order to heal and evolve, humans need to address pathologies and mature and nurture growth in their whole life, and their whole life can be broken up into those 4 buckets. So I read that because I'd never heard of it before, and I didn't think anything of it, and I thought, well, that's kind of interesting. But you know something about it, and you said there's a lot that you have to say about it.
Well, yeah, I said that there's a lot about it, and I don't know how to explain it because there's so much in what she said here, that it could be, multiple podcasts
Yeah.
and stuff. So yeah, so what I know about integral theory is it's something that I started to hear about, or learn about probably 4 years ago, and that there's a lot to it. I mean, she's broken this part down into, it's very surface level explanation.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know if she goes on further in her book, since I haven't read much further, about integral theory, but there's a lot to it. So like specifically, I have one of Ken Wilber's books in front of me, which is Sex, Ecology, Spirituality, The Spirit of Evolution. And just this one book has over 800 pages in it. And it's a big book. So he's not concise. And so reading it is, it's a lot. But I think that's where she also got her shadow theory information, or her shadow stuff, because they talk a lot about shadow. And in the way that I understand it is, it's just basically those parts of us that we, that come out, that we either are not consciously aware of, or I think after we get into recovery, we start to become more aware of them. But things like when you snap at your partner for something silly or little, that's part of your shadow that's, coming out. And so shadow work is the investigation of those parts of you, the darker parts that you wish weren't there, or that you deny about yourself. And so it belongs, I think, in the category of internal family systems, of looking at different parts of yourself and the psyche, and the way that you're kind of put together and made up. And so, so it's interesting that she has her theory based, in some of this stuff. Like I said, there's a lot more to it. I think some of the people that are into integral theory are also into like the Enneagram, which is a personality indicator, kind of like Myers-Briggs, but it's more based on what your, what would be the term, your edge is, as far as your growth, what area in your life, your spirit or emotional makeup do you need to grow the most, and so you work from that. So it's interesting and much more complex than is written in this small little area. But I do like that she gives some of the basics, which is the four quadrants, and that she explains it in a way that anybody can grasp it without having to study integral theory. So and I think that there are parts of AA that or the steps that most of us have developed that address a lot of this stuff, but I think that the program in general wouldn't acknowledge, or wouldn't fit into these categories. But I do think, when I look back on my own recovery, that's a lot of what's going on, that I've needed to work on, developing a shared meaning, with those around me. My internal process, for sure, understanding, myself, and developing that, and starting to trust in my own intuition, and process for discernment. Starting to look at things about the way I'm living, like who I'm living with, how I'm living, what kind of job I'm in, and simple things like making the bed every day. That would all be part of the it's quadrant. And then the physical body, that we often think of as separate from ourselves. Learning to be, one with that, or at least identify, what it's trying to tell me, that it's, it's part of this whole makeup, and that there's a lot, there's more information that my body's giving me on, how I feel, and the stuff that I either, need to work on, or that would be helpful for me, than I've ever noticed before. And so learning about that is, one of my core directions right now, becoming one with that. So there's a lot in there, and and if anybody looks into it, there's you might get overwhelmed. So take it easy. The John Dupuy in integral recovery, I watched a bunch of, he put out some podcasts a while ago. I don't know if they're still out there anymore, because it seemed like they were going into developing an integral recovery group type of a thing, or process. But last I checked, they had kind of abandoned that, and were doing something on alpha states and brain waves, and, you know, doing CDs that you could listen to get into different, you know, emotional states.
Well, she says this is the foundation of her school, of her 8-week program. So she must,
Yeah.
maybe when they do the program, she goes into some more detail about it. But do you find it even helpful? Is it something that you think is useful?
You know, I think that it can be, you know, and I'll look into, you know, what she has to say about it a little bit more. But I think that the entire thing is just, there's so much to it, that it would probably be overwhelming for a lot of people. Yeah. And so, you know, if she's just going with, you know, this basic structure that she's described, then yeah, I think that would be helpful to people. And I think that from what you've described in your, the course that you took, that a lot of that's in there. It's just, she's describing it in a different way, but, you know, basically, you know, it's all there, that, you know, we need to learn how to, you know, work with our interior, you know, our feelings, our motivations, our, you know, trauma, our, you know, experiences, whatever the thing is, you know, we need to start to understand, you know, why we do the things we do on a personal mental health, you know, level. But we also need to look at, you know, the choices we're making in career and partners, and, you know, having the friendships that we have. You know, do we choose these people because, you know, at some times in my life, I've chosen people because I thought that I was better than them and that I could help them, you know, like I was doing them a favor, you know, things like that. You know, is that how we're making our choices on friends? Or do we pick people, you know, that we feel, you know, inferior to because we think that's, you know, how we should be, that's our place in society, or, you know, things like that. So, you know, that all of those things are important, you know, and I've mentioned the physical body, you know, starting to understand, you know, body mechanics, and, you know, and I mean, just, you know, learning about gut health alone, you know, could be very helpful for people in recovery. You know, it can help them explain, you know, some of the stuff from detoxing, and preferences on certain foods, and, you know, and how to work with that. And so I think that can help, you know, as well. So yeah, so I think all of the stuff is in there, and I think that, you know, different places are discussing it in different ways. I don't know for sure if I think that using integral theory is the best way to go. I think that it tends to appeal to those that let's see, how would I describe it? It's really hard to describe, because they talk a lot about developmental process, and you know, and that has various levels, and that has different quadrants as well. And so there's a lot of quadranting in integral theory, and a lot of leveling, and that's why they call it a map, because, you know, you basically need a map to figure out what the hell they're talking about most of the time. So yeah, so I think there's something to it. I think there's things that you can get from it, but I wouldn't, you know, go all in on it, just because, you know, personally for me, if I go all in on something, then often that means I'm, you know, leaving other things out, or closing, you know, doors to other possibilities, and I want to be more open than that. So,
do you think that the average person in recovery, who is the average person in recovery? Yeah, the reason I'm asking this question is I did a podcast recently with Smart Recovery, and Tracy wrote in. She said that she thought that the one thing that she has a concern with Smart Recovery is that it assumes that people in their early recovery are rational, that they can think through, you know, because you have to stop and recognize your thoughts, ask yourself why you have them, blah blah blah, and do all that stuff. And she thought that, you know, when you're in early recovery, you're not really thinking like that well, and you can't really employ those kind of tactics. And
Mhm.
she said that in the early recovery, the thing that helps out the most is the community aspect.
Mhm.
So I guess my question is, do you think that is this too complex for people, and you're just kind of, and again, I guess it depends on the person and what they're going through.
Right. Yeah. I think if you were just reading it as a book, it probably, or yeah, that might not be helpful. I think it could be helpful if she's developed a program that emphasizes the social. I think that it would be a great program for women to come into at first, to have a social aspect with some of this information, because it does tend to. There's still patriarchal aspects to it, just because of the theories that it's based on, but there is an awareness of the feminine and masculine, and an awareness of that those don't necessarily apply to men, or
Mm-hmm.
apply directly to women. That
Yep.
they're not exclusive, is what I'm trying to say.
Right. She mentioned
Um,
that. She says that everybody has a male and a masculine and feminine part. And she said, of course,
yeah.
for her, she's mostly leans towards the feminine part, but there's the masculine part of her too.
Mhm. Yeah. We all have it.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of stuff about polarity within the theory as well. Um, so yeah, I think that, at least from what I understand of her discussion of it now, that it probably wouldn't be super accessible. I mean, she's explaining it as that it was to her, but she's explaining it from where she's at now at the writing of this book, rather than when she was trying to stop drinking.
Mm-hmm.
And so yeah, so I think that there's a time difference, because like, even when I look back at my
Mm-hmm.
early recovery, I look, our memories are not reliable. They change, and particularly if you've had certain kinds of therapy, that's the point of it, is to reframe your memories, so that they're less traumatizing. So yeah, so I think that that some of it, the way she's describing it is, and making it sound fairly straightforward, is probably not quite so, for someone early in recovery. And so I would probably go with what Tracy said, that yeah, it's not always easy to be able
Mm-hmm.
to be rational. And I think that smart recovery probably appeals to people who want to think of themselves as being rational,
Mm-hmm.
because I would have gone to smart recovery had it
Mm-hmm.
existed in Boise at the time, because I looked at towards rational recovery and Save Ourselves, and what was the women in sobriety one? I can't remember at this time. But yeah, I tried to look for all of that before, I succumbed
Yeah.
to the only gig in town. And, so I think it's helpful in that. I don't know, how effective it is in, people sticking around. I think they take some of the stigma that AA gives people who relapse away. And so
Mm-hmm.
I'm sure that it's more helpful for those who are struggling to be able to
Mm-hmm.
continue to go to smart recovery, because it's not stigmatized,
Right.
having a slip or anything like that. My understanding is they consider it part of recovery
Mm-hmm.
oftentimes.
Yep.
And whereas, in AA, if you have a slip, or, and some people, there are no slips, it's a relapse, but, somebody could, have a couple of glasses of wine at, a wedding or something. And then the next day go to a meeting again, and to me, that would be a slip, rather than a complete relapse, particularly if they made it back to, a meeting the next day type of a thing.
Yeah.
I hope I answered that.
You did. We'll have to do an episode on it. And Jackie did
Yeah.
mention that that's all from Carl Jung, all of that integral theory. Um, Can we finish up by going through some of these comments and then
Sure.
we call it a night, I guess? So there's some pretty good comments out there. First of all, Frank says that at the ICSA conference, they want to do a field trip to a rigid totalitarian meeting. Yeah, it could be fun. They actually did that. I didn't go, but at the very first conference in Santa Monica, a
Mm.
group of them went to the Pacific group and attended the meeting there. Yeah, Joe C was one of those, and
Yeah.
actually he said that they were very nice to them and it was a great meeting. I don't know. But
Yeah.
that, yeah, they did go, they did that. So yeah, we could do that. I think they have a crazy group in Washington, D.C., as far as I
Yeah.
know. Laughing Dog says that he knows some women who won't attend mixed meetings, too much testosterone.
Yeah.
Interestingly enough, for 25 years, I went to an all men's meeting,
Hmm.
and I guess I shouldn't always regret my past, but I just kind of wonder, good God, why did I do that? I guess it was helpful for me in the beginning, but it kind of it wasn't so good for me either. I didn't have a lot of input from different types of people, and
Hmm.
I didn't get that until I left that group. And that was one good thing that happened when I came out as an atheist at that group, and they didn't want me anymore. Basically,
Right.
after I left that group, that's the one good thing, is that I started meeting people that had different points of view. And I tell you what, I've evolved so much in the last 5-6 years, much more. I've grown much more in the last 5-6 years than I did all the previous time before that. And it's
Right.
just because I'm exposed to a lot of different types of people. I think that's really
Hmm.
important. Um, Anchor says, I love people who detest AA, but I try to get very hard to get them to a meeting so they can experience a fellowship with other aspects that might help them find their own way.
Hmm.
Um, Let's see what else. I think that's pretty much it. And Bubble Bree says, yeah, we do have a DC member in the group. Yeah, John Huey. Oh yeah, that's right. Greg is in our
Hmm.
group. Yeah, he knows about
Yeah.
all that kind of stuff.
Well, and
Um,
Greg's Kansas City now, so
yeah,
yeah.
he's in Kansas City, and he goes to our group, and then he's also goes to meetings in DC when he's in
Hmm.
town.
Yeah.
Um, oh, I don't know. I guess that's
Yeah.
about it.
Well, Storytime said that they were introduced to John Dupuy in Integral Recovery some years ago. We actually had weekly phone meetings, never
Oh,
really took
really?
off, but a core group of us formed an incredibly deep bond, and that
Wow,
it's been very
interesting.
helpful to their growth. Yeah, I think one of the things with those who are interested in integral theory or adhere to, the ideals, things like that, that the core of it is, working on yourself and where you're at in your development, and that it's very much based on seeking and growth, and so yeah, so I think that the people that are involved generally seem to be of that mindset, and the majority that I've met seem to be nice and on similar path as those that I've met in recovery. So yeah.
He also goes on to say, goes on to say that that's why in the beginning it's best to keep it simple.
Hmm.
Maybe if we do an episode on that, we should have Story on to talk about
Yeah.
it.
Yeah. That
Um,
sounds good to me.
and then where Frank was welcome to a women's meeting in Asheville, but didn't stay. Yep, I was once. I once went to a women's meeting, and in my very early recovery, really kind of needed a meeting. But when I realized it was a women's meeting, they were going to let me in. But I said, no, it's okay. You go on.
Yeah. Yeah.
Higher Palooza, Joe says, on Sunday at 2 Eastern. That's this Sunday.
Yeah.
Thank you for all these comments, guys. This is wonderful.
Yeah.
And Frank read varieties of religious experiences. I don't know if I ever want to read that. I think that's a big book.
Yeah.
I don't think I'd like it. Anyway.
Okay.
All right, everybody. Thank you so much. It's been a great Friday. I hope that this was useful to you, or if not useful, maybe entertaining, or both. I always enjoy doing this. I always learn something. I love this book, and I'm looking forward to reading the rest of it and learning more about Holly. I'd like to know more about her program, how much she charges for it. I'm sure she's making good bucks, but anyway, there's nothing wrong with that, I guess. All right, so. Angela, thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Oh, yeah.
And that's it. So we'll be back next week, Friday, for another live stream. And between that, I'll be posting episodes. Got a lot of them recorded that I need to post. But anyway, y'all take care. Be well. We'll be back again next week. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.